Alright. What's up, everybody, and welcome back. We've got ourselves a big best of 3 to start off PiGFest. Serral in the top right for Basilisk, up against his teammate Trigger. We have Rotterdam on the line with me, and you're going to be casting 2 of your boys from your team, Basilisk, with me. You're going to be casting, of course, for the whole group stage. We know Serral comes in as the favorite, but you were saying just before the match started, Roddy, you think Trigger's in kind of the best form he's ever been.
Yeah, I'm so impressed with how he's been able to play this much and has been able to keep up his motivation, because a lot of these guys, obviously, they live the great life of traveling from event to event, always having big things online and offline to look forward to. It's been a little quiet in the StarCraft 2 space over the last few months. Obviously, plenty of minor online stuff and a few big events in January, but it was incredibly hard for a lot of people to qualify for that. I just love how much Trigger has played, how active he is, how he's always doing his best in all these minor cups, no matter how big, how small, and it's really starting to show. He is starting to separate himself from that incredibly large pack of good Protoss players we have in the foreign scene. He's truly becoming one of the big boys, and I hope that he can bring that to the show today against Serral, a man he knows incredibly well. He has spoken to me a bit about some of their practice games in the past, and it sounds promising, Pig, but obviously playing against Serral in practice or playing against Serral in a tournament, probably not quite the same.
100%. I was chatting to Serral just 2 days ago and saying, how are ladder games going versus Max Packs? Because he's the big scary Protoss in Europe. And Serral said, I kept expecting the more we play this patch, the more to be losing. He's just going to, start owning me. But the more we play, I actually keep winning more, strangely enough. And I think Serral, we saw the story, right, in Masters Coliseum and everything else recently as well. All sorts of different interesting changes there.
All right. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the Max Packs thing. I didn't know about that, but one of the most, I think after winning the Lulu Cup, I had a little interview with Max Packs, and despite the fact that Serral won a couple series, he said he was still very confident into going them as well, because he felt he mostly threw all of them. So it's funny to hear that Serral was worried, but apparently still doing great, while Max Packs lost a couple series, but was also still incredibly confident that he could start turning things around, because he felt the majority of the reasons why he lost some of those games was mostly because he felt he personally messed up, rather than that he felt Serral was doing things better than anybody else has done it. So we have Trigger with 2 adepts in the natural already, grabbing 2 drones. 2 drones have morphed into spore crawlers, couple zerglings going down as well. That is drone number 3. This is an excellent start for Trigger.
This is a really old school way of playing. Not that old school, but I remember Showtime always stood by this. He said, just dive the 2 adepts no matter what. Even if you only get 2 drones, it's worth it. And we just saw 3 drones mining time, a spore crawler trick, and 3 zerglings. That's super high value. So Trigger's got to be really happy with that start. And he's going to try and take the 3rd in a straight line. I don't think he could necessarily get that up if he took it on the normal location. But I love that he's taking it up top. Serral doesn't even realize.
That's kind of cute after losing those 2 adepts, because obviously Trigger did want to try his luck with that Oracle on the other side of the map. Serral's queen positioning was excellent, but you are spot on, because Serral did send a couple of the Zerglings that picked off the 2nd adept in the end towards that triangle. Didn't see it. Now probably still thinking, okay, the start wasn't that pretty, but at least his 3rd is a little bit later. And I was like, wait a minute, it's 4 minutes, 20 seconds into the game. Is there still no 3rd? Serral checks the triangle once more, but should really start checking at that 9 o'clock position on this map. Otherwise, there's a chance that he's going to severely misread this game, and he might be anticipating some sort of a crazy 2-base play of Trigger, which obviously is not that popular on this patch, this meta, this map in particular, but it's crazy to see that Serral has still not sent a single Zergling to that 9 o'clock base.
He right now seeing this Forge is going to be so confused, Kev, because he's like, what? I thought this was like a Glaive Adept or something. Like, what's going on? Or Tempest, he must have been thinking. Now he sees the 3rd's finished 70 seconds after it starts. That's a very big delay for him. He built a Roach Roar, and he may have been a bit more conservative. Despite that, his drone count's not bad. Serral gets the information sooner rather than later. But that blink timing is quite scary recently. And I do wonder if Trigger's going to lean into like the 8-gate blink or the really fast 6-gate blink at all in this series. This game, it looks a bit more standard for Trigger. I wouldn't be surprised to see him go for the Storm, or the... I'm not too sure about the 2nd Forge. How do you feel about 2nd Forge in this matchup right now? I feel like it's not as popular.
Yeah, it's very hard. I think if you're incredibly quick and you're willing to be battling everywhere non-stop, you can still make it work. You can get some good value out of it. But I also agree that when you're playing on mostly Blink Stalkers, it makes a lot more sense to go for those attack upgrades anyway. And having Storm as backup just seems a little bit more reliable. Because even if you have Double Forge, if you don't have Storm or, let's say, Colossus or anything like that, it's just going to be really hard to battle large number of Hydras, right? especially
Yeah.
Hydras with Lynx, if there is a +1 melee upgrade as well. I don't think it truly matters how good those Stalker upgrades are. Hydras in large enough numbers with both of their upgrades are going to be fine against those Stalkers. So I think I'm with you, but I don't hate to see it once in a while. But I also think it really favors the very fast Protoss players, the ones that are willing to multitask and attack everywhere.
Yeah, the moment you give up momentum, it can be tough, especially with this fast Hydra style. We saw Serral have a lot of success in both Masters Coliseum and the big Luli 2024 finals using a melee style. Lots of fast melee upgrades. A lot of players have moved away from that, and I was wondering if Serral would as well. It seems like the answer is yes. Faster attack upgrades on the Hydras is what it's all about. You know, a lot of people were still rushing +2 melee for a while, and it was almost like, hey guys, 9 months ago, a year ago, they stopped the Banelings one-shotting probes. Like, you know, +2 melee isn't the power spike that it used to be. Not to mention with energy recharge on Psy Storms, you know, Banelings are kind of past their use-by date in the meta at this point, so heavy Stalker pressure, but the Hydra count, as that grows, is going to come forward. Interestingly, Serral did not go for Groove Spines, the Stasis Traps. Nice pullbacks for Trigger so far. Just picking away at the enemy units, trading efficiently, and securing a 4th base behind it.
Yeah, Trigger got a little bit unlucky when he dropped a Revelation earlier. He got like one circling in the rocks, but somehow missed all those creep tumors. And it's very useful for Serral, because if Serral didn't have those creep tumors here anymore, this would have already been incredibly scary. But you know what? I still think it's pretty damn scary. Trigger is very casually going up to 4 base. He's even taking the center base, as Serral is going to try to go down this ramp. But at this point, it does not feel that Serral truly has the numbers. Trigger is getting a lot of free pickoffs, has been doing a good job with those oracles. Look at the units lost resource tab. We lost the Queen, lost 3 Hydras, 44 Zerglings, while all the Trigger lost so far while moving out is 1 Stalker. This is just starting to look really good for Trigger. I'm loving that Templar Archives. I think this is the game for it, especially if you're going to be able to get your hands on that rich Vespian Geyser. But I'm sure that you found this out as well, Pig. Once you have that base, it still takes like 2 years before you can finally warp in that rich Vespian Geyser. But this game is looking mega for Trigger at this point. I would almost say slow it down a little bit, play it safe, because he's up 12 workers. He's going up to 4 bases. He's heading towards Storm, Double Forge. Like, what more could you really ask for? I think at this point, there's one goal for Trigger. Don't die in the next, let's say, 90 seconds. And if you do that, I mean, this game is amazing.
He hasn't started Storm yet, Kev. That's one thing that has me worried. 5th Nexus goes down, it's Double Forge. The Templar Archives is up, but he's not made Psy Storm. And I think just a few Storms makes him unbreakable. I mean, his supply is already going to be hard to break, but he's choosing to go Zealot Archon. Trigger is going for raw numbers, and this is an interesting choice. Perhaps respecting Serral's dodging so much that he thinks Storm won't land, but Nexus does get killed, no cancel there. Stalkers are holding on the front. I like that Trigger's not pulling home. He realizes the power of the Stalkers is kind of like doing a fighting retreat, using the Stasis Traps. A lot of the times people who play Double Forge Heavy Gateway, they lose when they give up position on the map, and then the Zerg shoves them and gets a really good arc of Hydras. But if the Zerg has to push through the Stalkers, it's so hard to get a good position on the Protoss side of the map without losing half your army on the way across.
Yep, I am with you. I think I would have loved Storm, man. It really feels like it makes a lot of sense, especially while he can now take that Rich Vespian Geyser in that center 4th base. Serral's got a crazy amount of Hydras, has been able to drone up a little bit, is firing up that hive. I have the feeling that Trigger should be able to take a really good fight on the right side. The Zealot Archon Tiny Stalker army has been doing good, and that is going to allow Trigger to at least get a few drones, maybe a bit more. How much can those Stalkers do in the center? They're starting to look good as well. Trigger is winning everywhere we look, Piggy.
Damn, he does lose the army in the bottom right, though. The Zealot Archon got a little separated. One of the Archons got surrounded before the fight started. He has to preserve the Stalker count. Supply-wise is great. I mean, Trigger's on 80 workers against 63 drones. As long as he doesn't mess up a huge fight, this is amazing. And what a far forward Stasis Trap, freezing the Hydras. Serral is in a bit of trouble right now. Ever since not spotting that 3rd early, it feels like Trigger is just in a dominant spot. 3-2 upgrades starting. Fleet Beacon is done. Doesn't quite have the gas for Mothership, but no doubt, as you said, that rich gas will go down in the near future. I normally call that the garbage base because it does end up only having 6 mineral patches and a very delayed gas. But when you get the purple gas, it pays off, unfortunately. Trigger feeling the excitement. Both players playing at 300 to 500 APM actions per minute. And Trigger is going to keep diving in. He knows that right now Serral is vulnerable. He wants to do damage before the lurker count gets in here.
Yep, there's no Observer, no Revelation over here at the Triangle base of Serral, but Trigger is just finding good fights everywhere. He's on 14 gateways pick, so he can absolutely continue to be this aggressive while counting down the seconds to get an even bigger upgrade lead. He's already ahead in upgrade, but he's about to be 3 upgrades ahead, and at this point, after taking a lot of economic damage, Serral can't really find the resources to fire up additional upgrades, so that lead is only going to get bigger and better on the side of Trigger. 5 bases, first Tempest on the way. I don't know if like a single Tempest is going to make much of an impact. I would personally love to see some observers, maybe even observer speed, because as long as he keeps detection on the other side of the map, I actually think Trigger is very close to taking the 1-0 lead here.
Yeah, I'd love to see that Size Storm addition just to round things out, but his numbers are so good. And the way he's split in 3 packs, I mean, Zealots aren't good attacking into a big chunk of lurkers, but if you're hitting an undefended base, you're going to kill so many drones before Serral can react. Serral going to try and thrust down the bottom with half of his army. He's desperate. He's on 65 workers. He's been pushed into the Zerg naughty corner, the position when Zerg has to sit on 3 bases equivalent of workers and just mass army and look for the perfect engage. Hydra Lurker's going to go down. Is there detection? It's a recall for Trigger. It's only a Zealot recall, and those Lurkers are going to devastate that base.
Yeah, there was actually detection near the triangle of Serral, and Trigger could have gone for it. Some lurkers were a little bit exposed, but he didn't go for it. So instead, he just ate a couple of very big lurk shots. This would have all been incredibly bad for Trigger if he didn't have just so many freaking gateway units to work with. So even when he's a bit out of position, he can warp in 14 gates. We need a revelation. We don't get it, but as long as that observer stays alive, he puts it in surveillance mode. Most of the lurkers will get picked off. Trigger has lost 24 probes, but I think he's rich enough, Piggy. I think he can afford it as long as he cleans up the army. But
the observer got sniped.
Really start killing that army, as there is a little Zealot counterattack as well. And the mothership is about to show up. It's looking dicey, but I still want to believe that Trigger, with that massive economy he had, should be able to stabilize here.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because Serral's made the game dirty now. You know, he sniped the observer just barely, and that has allowed these 2 lurkers to cause a lot more damage and destruction. 25 workers went down. There's like, the supply is not good for Serral by any means, even though it's up, but it's much better than it was a minute ago. You know, he's up 7 workers. Maybe he can make some magic happen, but I mean, 3-2 upgrades, even just like a Zealot versus a Hydra is such an unfair battle with these upgrades.
Yep, and then you get a couple of Archons in the mix, you get a few Immortals as well. Serral, of course, threw pretty much all of his Lurkers there. He's got 4 Lurkers left, he's gonna morph 4 more. I love how he picked all the low HP Hydras, by the way, realizing that every single HP could make the difference here. Serral's indeed gonna try to continue to just make this game messy and hope that the Lurkers can shine. If Trigger takes another fight where maybe he loses the Observer or just runs out of detection, doesn't have it to begin with. But Trigger is still, I think, despite everything, in a really good spot as my game is freezing.
Let's go, guys. We had a technical issue, but we are resuming from replay right when it started to lag there. They only played for about 5 more seconds before I did drop out of the game, but we're back in and everything should be good to go. Serral on the south side trying to do a desperate push. Remember, guys, Serral is behind in income and he's trying desperately to find mistakes from Trigger. Trigger, no detection in the south side. He's got to be careful.
Yeah, it does land a little storm, suffers up a couple of the lurkers, but Serral did an excellent job moving these Hydras back. I mean, Serral has really played from an almost impossible position, down in bases, down in workers, I'd say down in tech as well, just because Trigger's got way better upgrades, but he's still battling. He has found some success, but I think in the end Trigger is stabilizing, and losing 20 workers as a Protoss is incredibly tough, unless you've got 5 bases. You know, then you throw down a couple Chronos and you get those 20 workers back in no time, and it wouldn't hurt Trigger at all to slow this game down a little bit, but a lot of players, and I'm sure you agree with this, they're afraid to slow things down against Serral, right? Because it's so rare that you're in a really good spot, so they feel like they need to send it, they need to close it out, but at this point, it's really not up to Trigger to do anything crazy or desperate. The game is looking perfectly fine, and only once Serral's trying to saturate another base, that's when I think Trigger can continue to send it. But a few more cannons, observers, and a couple extra storms wouldn't hurt him at this point.
Yeah, I think half and halving the army, splitting it up is the way to go. But you know what? Serral overcommits here, and those 3-2 Zealots are insane, man. They do so much damage. No probes go down on this base whatsoever. And as the army tries to go south, Serral's trying to catch him out of position, but I think this is just the last desperate counterpunch. If Trigger cleans this up, it's lights out.
Yep, it's starting to look like it, because not even Serral can stick around on 66 drones forever. An absolutely amazing storm of that single High Templar, and here are those very well upgraded Zealots once more. Go back to the gateway count, pick 14. It is so fun to play Protoss with 14 gateways, plus 3 attack, plus 2 armor. And just like that, it's Trigger who takes the 1-0 lead. And remember what he said before the game started, Pig? Make sure to keep mentioning that ping difference. This was on US Central, the server that's better for Serral than it is on Trigger. Game 2 will obviously be played on US West. We could be looking at an absolutely insane offset here. And that is, by the way, officially the first map ever that Trigger has won in a competitive environment over Serral. Obviously, he's won some custom games, maybe a ladder, but never in an official tournament. So Trigger already getting a little bit of a reward for all that hard work that he's put in over the last few months.
All right, going into map 2, Basilisk Serral down a game. He's going to have to win this one and the next map to bring it back. Trigger with a fantastic start in the bottom right of El Dorado.
Yeah, it goes back to the first 2 adepts right in that previous game. That's where things already started to look a little bit up for Trigger. He got 3 drones with 2 adepts. He got a couple Zerglings and then he even forced 2 additional drones to morph into Spore Crawlers. Every Protoss will gladly sign for that. Even if it ended up him losing those 2 adepts, you are more than happy with that. And then Serral, with a kind of uncharacteristic mistake, sent those 6 or whatever Zerglings he had left over to the other side of the map, and he kept them at the triangle. Did not check the 9 o'clock base. So while Serral thought, okay, that was a rough start, but I'm still, on 3 bases. My opponent is still on 2. Trigger was able to continue to be annoying with his oracles while having 0 DPS at home, yet was able to expand despite those Zerglings of Serral. And yeah, a lot of things happen afterwards, but pro gamers will often analyze games on the first really impactful major thing that went wrong. And I think it's safe to say that that's already where it went wrong for Serral.
100% Roddy, and look at the detail of these openings. Trigger has already been speed microing his probes to make them mine faster by shift clicking them just to stop them decelerating as much to get every little bit he can. He's gone gas first, no scout, into the gateway in the Nexus. This is as greedy as it gets for Trigger, and you know when Serral's down a game, he is not risking it on a 12 pool. He almost never risks it on a 12 pool, even when he's ahead in a series. So this is a very safe risk to take. It is such a safe gamble. It's just good play, understanding his opponent for Trigger, and optimizing his opening. I love this way of opening up in map 2 off of an advantage.
Yeah, that's fun, because obviously Max Packs in the big January tournaments, the 2 big Chinese tournaments that ran online, also played without scouting a decent amount of games against Zerg. And Raynor is a little different than Serral. You do that once against Raynor, he's annoyed. You do that a second time, he's got a 12-pool drone pool you, right? And obviously a lot of fans were confused because Max Packs did end up losing a game or 2 against 12 pools and drone pools. It's like, why would you do it? And I asked Max about it, and he's like, well, it's just pure greed. I don't really have any other reason. He's like, the build just flows a tiny bit better if I don't scout. And I kind of feel like most of the time I don't need to scout. So it's a risk I'm willing to take. Trigger also apparently agrees. Loves the flow of getting the tiny bit of extra money and taking the risk of not scouting here. And I do, of course, completely agree with you. Like, what were the odds that Serral down Oron would randomly 12-pull drone pool here? Like, that would be so wild.
It's crazy that the little exponential gains you get from a good start, and your Nexus is faster simply because you've been mining minerals harder, right? In the early game, just that one extra probe mining makes a big difference. The earlier gas means you can afford a Void Ray, and you can slap down a Twilight Council really early behind this if you want to rush Glaives or go Fleet Beacon for Tempest. So it really makes everything that bit better. And with Trigger, Clem being 2 of the players who are really, they're the best in the world, I would say, at optimizing that worker micro at the start. You might think, does that really make a difference? Even if it just gives you 30 more minerals, it allows him to then hit a few seconds earlier with these 2 adepts, get in there with the Void Ray into Twilight Council, and it is that fast. Twilight Council does look like a potential Glaives follow-up for Trigger. We'll see how this works against Serral. Serral's taken the base behind the gold, so he likes to do that one where he can then full wall the front. So Glaive adepts, you could argue, are kind of weak at running in the front, but you can always open up one of these middle mineral patches, attack the third base, and I think maybe you can wall in front of that hole that Serral's mined with an Evo chamber. I'm not sure if that works or not. You probably should.
Couple of Zerglings are going to try to get a surround on the 2 adepts on the right side, and where Serral was not able to slow down the third base of Trigger at all in game 1. This is already way more value. And look at that Void Ray pick. It was so confused. It was all the way in the center of the map. Now it's forced to turn around, go all the way home. So with just a couple Zerglings, Serral was already creating a much, much better start for himself.
4-gate Glaives is much more weak if you've lost a few adepts early, right? Having those 2 adepts a bit later with Glaives, much better. But Serral does still need to realize what's happening, and I think a Void Ray always rings alarm bells for a Zerg, but it doesn't tell you what's happening. It just tells it could be straight macro off Void Ray. I'd say that's the more rare option. More often it is Fleet Beacon Tempests or Glaive Adepts or something like that. Occasionally it's a charge let it all in. Adept here trying to shade to safety right now. The Void Ray's way out of position, and these Zerglings are finding value. They're going to get the probe as well, I think.
Yep, they're gonna get the probe, they're gonna get another adept, and even this final adept could be in a tiny bit of trouble because one adept really doesn't have crazy DPS. This Void Ray so far has just been confused, like it's just not sure what it wants to do, doesn't want to be at home helping out, doesn't want to go to the other side of the map. In the end, the Trigger has finally found the natural of Serral here, but what is a single Void Ray going to accomplish? I'd say absolutely nothing. Queens are nearby, spores. If you even get one drone there, you can be lucky. Perhaps the only really good news for Trigger so far is that Serral is still droning. And Serral has picked up so many adepts that perhaps he's just no longer thinking about this ever being resonating glaive adept. Serral needs roaches, Piggy, and he needs them quick.
The queens are out front to intercept. That's a good start there for Serral when you've only got 8 Zerglings and a few queens that you can push back the adepts any moment at all as big. Void Ray comes in from behind. Adepts going in the front. Drones have to evacuate. Serral mined out that entire wall, so that whole plan about the Evo chamber I was mentioning, not an option at all. And the wall-off's usually the best way to stop these adepts threatening multiple bases at once. Adepts getting in there. Trigger needs more damage. He's going Robo and a Forge behind it. Cancels his shade. Queens are deflecting. Void Ray does chase, but the Spore Crawler deflects. Looks like it just got the Extractor and a bit of mining time for now. And I think Trigger may be giving up on doing more direct damage, just looking to harass a bit, because seeing the Roaches and Queens out, he's just, you know, if he dives on top of 10, 15 Roaches, 6 Queens, it could be a nasty trade, but that's a good way of doing it. Just pick off a Queen here or there.
Mm-hmm. And he's forcing out a lot of units at this point, and Serral has been able to drone up in a little while. It's funny that, though, right? Because if Trigger would say, let's say he's a bit worse than what he actually is, Pig, and he's just like, well, I made adepts, and I'm going to have to find damage, and he just shades them in. I actually think this goes really well for him. But he doesn't see all the things that we see. He didn't know that Serral didn't have a lot of Zerglings. 8 Lings is all that Serral had. Roaches were in production, but they weren't done yet. But the Trigger gave Serral a lot of respect there, and is like, nah, this is too good to be true. Like, I'm getting jebaited. He wants me to shade in. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to make sure I can keep these units alive. And by doing that, he has actually kind of allowed Serral to get all those units out in time in the end. And yeah, Trigger found a queen or two. But I honestly think if he's crazy that big and he full sends it, oh, he's going to find an insane amount of damage.
I'm with you. 100%. The Queens can't keep up with the shade. Mostly Zergling army. Doesn't matter if you shade in the middle of that. The numbers were in Protoss' favor. Roddy's analysis on point as always. At this point, though, keeping the Adepts alive, they help against the Zerglings. The question is, you know, of course, is the rest of your tech too delayed as Protoss? The 4th base coming down now at 7.5 minutes. You're going to go Blink, Immortal, and Sentry. Very mid-tier focused army seems to be what he's focusing on to make sure he has the numbers to contest the Zerg mid-game. Now, interestingly, Serral, blast from the past. Saw him do this on his stream the other day versus Skillis, going back to the old Ravager-Ling Bane, a style which we almost never see these days.
Nice little Zergling poke at the 3rd base of Trigger, since Trigger did not have a single cannon or shield battery there. Just a couple of Lings, even without +1 melee. Finds some decent damage immediately. That's 8 workers going down. Also pulls the army a little bit out of position, as the Serral is going to try to make some progress with his army. But yeah, I feel like we saw it maybe once or twice in the month of January as well. That big January month with all those tourneys that we did get to see Serral play in, but a lot of Zergs don't really believe in it. They think Archons are too good, Storms are too good, and that +2 melee power spike that you mentioned in the past is obviously no longer a thing. Hasn't been a thing for a while, but I think in the end, it's a numbers game. And it is important to mention, there is a big gold base at the bottom side of this map that Serral already has taken. He's saturating now. Once you've got a big gold, you can obviously make a lot of Lings, a couple Banelings, couple Roaches, couple Ravages, and just try to do it the good old Zerg swarmy way.
100%. The Baneling's up at the top. I love that he's waiting until there's a distraction and Trigger's moving his Adepts out of position as the Banelings get clicked in. Oh, he moves 2 Adepts back. Maybe they can block for a few seconds. He's got to react quickly. Trigger not watching. Baneling run by is going to get big damage.
Yep, you don't see that too often. 12 probes going down to a couple of slow Banes, but obviously Serral is on point there with his move out, knowing that Trigger is going to pay attention to his army in the center of the map. Trigger does not want to get close to creep with this many Stalkers. Sentries as the War Prism gets sniped immediately by those Ravagers. It's a bit of a messy game, Pig, but in the end it's starting to look really good here for Serral.
And our sideline analyst, Lambo, tuning in right now and saying Ravager Bane is so good against this Stalker Sentry style. You know, there's no Storms, there's no Oracles. Those are the things that stop this style from working. And right now, those aren't existing. Desperate Adept counterattack getting blown up by Banelings. At the same time, this 4th base, he has to hold here. Trigger needs to micro these Stalkers like his life depends on it. Serral falling back with the Roach Ravager. The Adept still trying to dance around behind the natural. Trigger's not out of this yet. He has 4 bases up. He's in a decent position. if he can hold and add some splash damage, but it kind of feels like he's worried about what's going to happen next. I think if he steps on creep one more time, it's going to be lights out. He will get swarmed by that Ravagerling army.
Yep, and losing the Prism, having a lack of detection because he only made a single Void Ray this game. There are 2 Overseers of Serral, by the way, that's just been chilling for the longest time in the Naturals, so they can drop some Contaminate as well. Serral, of course, getting his hands on another gold. He has taken it on the quote-unquote wrong side. Serral apparently does not care about the wrong side, doesn't need that Extractor, just wants more minerals to make even more links. 14 more Banelings are morphing. And this is going to be incredibly difficult for Trigger. If you have a couple Archons, if you got a lot of static defenses, you're going to be okay. But he doesn't have those things. So if you're a Stalker, this is so damn hard to fight.
Oh, those Banelings are going to start smashing through. I mean, I do like the positioning for Trigger, the way he pulls into an expanding arc and gets his probes out of there. Third base, his probes taking damage. Oh, damage probes going down to the +1 melee Zerglings. Stalker's trying to pull back here. He's going to have to spread them. He needs to get back in that arc he was in before. But the moment he clumped up, the Ravagerling Bane became much scarier, and I think Serral happy to take the base. Lings, he's going to leave on top of those probes as the valuable Roach Ravager army. Serral never loses that. Just takes out the probes, gets out with his valuable units, remaxes the Ling Bane, adds Adrenal, +2 melee, 2 more hatcheries on the way, and this has been a really good adjustment from Serral to block Trigger's playstyle. Trigger maybe missing an opportunity with his early Glaive Adepts, as Roddy was pointing out, but Serral too good in the following phases. And, you know, it was a Ling run by on the third, killed 8 probes. And then Banelings go in, got 12 probes. If those 2 things didn't happen, I think maybe Trigger could hold on. But once Serral gets momentum, he does not let go. All right, well, game 3 starting up. Serral loving that 15 Overlord build where you do the early Extractor trick down here. And, of course, the greatest player of all time representing Basilisk he is up against the young blood, the player, who people said, oh, that's a bit of an ugly duckling pickup, Basilisk. This Trigger guy, you know, when they picked him up quite a few years ago, everyone was like, what? You've got the guys who are vying for all the world championships, Raynor and Serral, and then you picked up Trigger. But they said, hey, we looked at the numbers. We've never seen in the history of any player a rise up the rankings in a Ligulac and from kind of GM starting to play amateur and then pro tournaments into the pro ranks as quick and rapid as Trigger. And, you know, I got to reminded of that talking to him before the tournament. And yeah, it's just wild, man. Like, I'm like, oh yeah, like, you know, which I was talking about like which patches were the most interesting, the best that he would like to go back to. He can't remember anything before like 2021. Like he's just like, I'm like, wait, I forgot. Everyone's been playing this game for 15 years. You've been only at a pro level for like the last 4 years, 5 years really. So he's definitely a newcomer in a scene that is filled with ancient veterans. He's one of the few players who's showing you can break through into that top level even today.
Yeah. And it's impressive what Trigger has done. And at one point, I think a lot of people kind of felt like, oh, this is it, right? He has stagnated. But over the last few months, he really has put in the hours. And it's starting to show. He looks so damn good from time to time. Don't want to correct you, Piggy, but he was technically the first player on Basilisk. The world champs joined a little bit later. But,
oh, really?
You know, in the end of the day, I do totally get your point. Serral, massive name, multiple-time world champion, Raynor world champ, Game SA champ. And then Trigger is the guy's like, he's really good, but he doesn't quite have those same accomplishments. But he was the OG, mate. He was.
Wait,
the
when
first
did you
man
get
on
picked
board.
up? Were you before or after that?
I was technically after, but I was already obviously in a lot of talks with Basilisk.
Oh, did you worm tongue Trigger in their ear? Were you like, get Trigger?
Yes.
He's gonna be the GOAT. Were you part of that decision?
I mean, not necessarily in that way, but you know, when they were thinking about entering StarCraft 2, we just had some talks about it, and they were looking at, you know, young, aspiring, up-and-coming players, and I was like, well, there's a couple that fit this agenda, and the rest they did themselves. They went to Home Story Cup. I think you remember that, where they doubled the prize pool of Home Story Cup.
Oh yeah.
And gave all the players at least $500 extra for being there. And that is, I think, when things got really serious with Trigger. That's where they were able to have a conversation with him in person, which, you know, obviously says more than just having online talks. But I wouldn't say I was the reason, but I did obviously point out, like anybody in the scene back then would have pointed out, like, hey, there's this kid in Canada who's been getting a whole lot better in a pretty rapid time. And he's an interesting one. And yeah, the rest they took care of.
Awesome to see, and I love the Basilisk guys and what they've been doing for the scene. Double adept pressure again. Is he going to commit this time around? There's no gap behind the minerals, but there is a little nook in the middle. So this is the weird feature of Frostline. A lot of the time you can dance in, behind, and around the mineral line. On this one, there's just no space behind. It also means there's nowhere to put stasis traps around the back, and it's in general a bit harder, I would say, to sneak oracles along the edges because queens can just cut you off very easily at any of these edges. So it's definitely a map where going single Oracle straight into Twilight Council, old school Archon drop, it looks like, is what I would normally expect from this opening.
Yeah, this is also the first game where Trigger has been very cautious with these adepts. Like, he's there, he's threatening. Serral has Zerglings, by the way, on the other side, trying to do the Serral things. Serrals are, whatever happened in game 1 pick, that's not going to happen anymore. You're not going to go up to 3 bases while not having any units to protect that probe. And I'm obviously going to make sure, look at him moving those links between the triangle and the linear base. Serral learns from his mistakes very quick.
And he gets his first value from it. A probe rallying out to the base does get sniped off. Adept's going to move down there, and the Oracle will head over as well. But Trigger simply diverts his units. Says, let's take the northern base as Glaive Adepts comes in, 3rd and 4th gateway one more time. Serral on this map, I think, is going to probably have to use that wall-off response to deal with the Glaive Adepts. Oh, if he gets in, that's huge.
Yep, that is already used. Not even necessarily because of the damage, but he's going to get a really good scout. He's going to see the extra gateways. He's going to see that Trigger is chrono boosting that Twilight Council. Obviously, spotted Trigger warping in extra adepts as well. Drops the Baneling nest, Piggy. How do you feel about Link Bane against adepts?
I mean, if you are really not wanting to play roaches, I mean, Banelings are amazing if you can hide them from the adepts. They can just, you know, if they shade in a clump, your Banelings come out of the fog of war. It's pretty brutal. Adept Shades only have 4 vision, so very easy to hide them, but it's not as reliable in big extended situations as the roaches for direct fighting. Nice stasis harassment here from Trigger. Serral does get
good though, right? It's a lot of lost mining time. Oh, the last one could get everything.
Oh my gosh!
The last one!
Rare mistake here for Serral. That queen should have been working on it the whole time, but now the adepts are coming out. He's massing Ling Bane. I think Trigger should realize he's being scouted and not commit too much. I mean, he's already building a Robo and a Forge. It's 4-gate, remember, with no Robo. So this is the version where you cannot afford to just throw these adepts away. It's 13 adepts, though. Ling's finding 2, 3, 4 probes on that 3rd base. And you gotta be careful. I mean, you remember, he didn't find as much damage as he could have in that last game, Kev, because he didn't commit to the shade. But, oh, the Banelings hiding themselves? No, they've been seen. He's got to cancel these shades. Oh, Trigger, he's not watching!
Whoa, he's crazy. He's absolutely crazy. He lets it finish up in the middle of all the Lings, Queens, and Banes. Loses all of them rather quickly, while Zerglings are still finding some damage on the other side of the map. Yeah, Trigger definitely trying to do things different than last game. It's like, I gave him too much respect. This time, Pick, there was no respect, but he kind of got punished for it.
Yeah, I think those handful of Zerglings just did so much. You know, attention is a resource in StarCraft, and Serral was so annoying with those. He forced a warp in, but then he ran the Zerglings away. The Adepts moved out of the base, and then the Zerglings went right back in. Trigger's vision was just getting pulled to the wrong place at the wrong time. You know, if he was in a more stable mindset, if he was keeping his eyes on everything, there's no way he would have completed that shade in. But now he's massing Adepts. For, you know, 7 minutes, he's still having to make adepts here. And,
no.
he's letting units in his base again. Things are going from bad to worse for Trigger. It looked like we might see that Cinderella story with game 1 being so dominant for him. But game 2 and game 3, Serral's back in control, and he is not missing a beat.
Yeah, this is rough, as now more Lings are getting on top of the 3rd base as well. Once again, there is no shield battery here in the 3rd. So the Canadian Protoss already losing 15 probes just like that. Lings in natural main and 3rd at the same time, and you don't have a single battery. It's so rough. This game could have been so good for Trigger as well if he does not let that shade finish up, but he did. And at this point, he feels he's just a little too far behind. GG gets called. Serral will take his first W of the tournament.
All right. What's up, guys? We've got Gaming Gladiators Shin in the top right side here of PiGFest. It is Group A, our second match. Liquid Cure down in the bottom left side of the map. It's Terran versus Rotterdam. You're joining me. We were just talking about this match and how it's kind of weird because Cure struggles with quite a few of the top Zergs, but he is so good at TVT and TVP. Like, if it wasn't for Maru, Cure would basically beat everyone in TVT, and his TVP is famous for always winning. But he struggled with the very top Zergs. That being said, Shin doesn't quite have necessarily the blitzing speed of, say, a Rainer, right? He's more of like a clever build order Zerg. So my eyes are really glued to what surprises Shin brings out and how Cure handles those in this match.
Yep, and also wondering what Cure is going to bring, because Cure has been historically a bit of an Aatraxer in this matchup. And what he can do incredibly well is where we often look at a certain move on and be like, all right, this is it. This is the move on that needs to win. Then it doesn't win, but you're like, well, he actually still has a lot of Marines. Then he loses 20 SCVs to some Banelings at home, and he's like, he still has a big army, and then the army gets even bigger, and the game just drags on. Where you're like, I swear, guys, he is all in, but it's just happening for like 7 minutes straight. And the man can crank out even Liberators and Ghosts and 2, if not 3 upgrades while working on 37 SCVs at home. It's going to be fun. It's going to be interesting. I think the scouting is going to be very important for Shin. I don't know if I would really trust him on like being the most diligent scouter of all time, but it's gonna be fireworks, Piggy. It's really hard to make proper analysis before these two play. I think maybe after the first game we'll have a better feel of what they are going to bring to the table today. But anything is possible, and I feel like no outcome would surprise you or me.
No, 100%, man. I love the way you describe that, because like it really is stressful. If you've got a heart condition, I'm going to give you guys some advice. Do not be a fan of Cure, because even when he wins tournaments, he never makes it look super like there have been tournaments where you're like, oh, he's 23 wins to 2 losses versus Protoss over the last 3 Premier events. But every single series, it's like game 5 decider base trade. It looks like, you know, his barracks is floating in the corner of the map, burning on fire, and he kills the last pylon, and you're like, oh my lord, I almost had a heart attack. And that's just so common in a lot of his series. And it does happen, like you said, in his Terran vs. Zerg as well, where he'll go for an 8 racks, but he'll build a 4th command center behind it. It's just a bit delayed. And he'll delay his 2-2 by a full minute. And you'll think, well, he's pretty all in. But he'll find ways to like really take control of the game with heavy pressure and then turn it into something that has some longevity without being, you know, your Clem who's like 6-minute 4th command center sometimes, you know, super fast 2nd eBay armory. And actually his blocking's going really well. Oh, he blocks the drone.
Yeah. Love that he moves the SCV to one refinery, moves the Reaper to the other, puts hold position, makes it impossible for that drone to morph into anything other than the hatchery, obviously, but that got blocked as well. And already a sweet start here for Cure, and if I was Shin, I'd be a little bit annoyed. The Reaper grenade goes down, moves the Queen back even further, and this is one hell of a delay with just a single Reaper. We are 10 seconds away from Zerg. He's gonna get another drone pick. Are you kidding?
Dude, even if he didn't get that, he forced 14 Zerglings out. Shin has massively overcommitted to these Zerglings. If they don't surround these 2 Hellions and do big damage, this is an awful opening for Shin. Like, it is massive momentum for Cure right now. 2 drones, 3rd base at 3 minutes 40. His natural is only at 12 workers. Shin's economy is shot, and his Ling's waiting on the watchtower. He wants to get some information about where the Hellions are before he shows them, but this is just objectively a bad economy. Don't get me wrong, Zerg economy isn't quite what it was in Heart of the Swarm, where you always want to be 20 workers ahead, but you don't want to be down on workers against a Terran player who has 3 orbitals 4 minutes into the game. This is a rough start for Shin.
And he made his own economy even a tiny bit worse. Well, he had 14 free supply, and he's like, you know what, 4 overlords. And obviously, I love seeing guys not be supply blocked in the early game pick, but seeing 60 out of 92, 4 minutes and 20 seconds into the game, that doesn't really feel ultimately very optimal either. Shin is just in a bit of trouble. Does get the 2 Hellions in the bottom right side, as he had those Lings waiting at the Zelnaga watchtower all this time. So that is the first thing I think Shin is going to be very happy with. But overall, a bit of a shaky start, and Cure might be a tiny bit annoyed over losing those Hellions the way he did. But Cure is incredibly experienced, and he knows if he gets such a delay on that hatchery and he forces out all those Lings, life is good. He opened up triple command center. He has not lost a single SCV. Life is good for Cure, even after losing those 2 Hellions.
Shin now transferring to his 3rd. Took a little while to do that. He's got to be picture perfect on that economy to recover. His first Spore Crawler went down as if he's expecting libs, but now he does seem to realize, okay, it's past the Liberator timing. Got to be careful against the Banshees. Puts those spores in a better position. And I just went to his vision for a second and we got the Diva voice alert. I forgot, for those who don't know, the 2 highest testosterone gamers in the world, both Shin and Estrella, 2 top pro gamers, who are the only pro gamers who can handle having a high-pitched girl screaming in their ear the entire time they're playing professional StarCraft matches. What can I say? It's a personal choice. Not many of us understand it, but we have to respect it.
Double Cloak Banshee is going to head towards the 3rd base of Shin. Maybe Cure was hoping to snipe a drone that was being sent over. I think he saw the Lings working on those rocks. So that should be nice. There is not all that much creep here in the main, so maybe you can find a sweet spot somewhere. That's the one place where those Banshees absolutely shouldn't go. But until that lair is done, you don't have an Overseer, and you have Spore Crawlers to give yourself some detection, but it's very annoying. I think the Cure could have maybe done a tiny bit more, right? Maybe shoot at the drones from the high ground. from the main at the third, and then also hover near that ramp, because you know that those Zergs are always building workers, and those workers are often rallied towards the third, fourth, fifth base, whatever. 2 drones is about as little as he was ever going to get there, but he does keep the Banshees alive, and that's obviously good news for him.
Shin, of course, getting up to that big economy. It's necessary for him in this matchup as the Banshees barely escape, because Shin used to be known as Ragnarok. So always have people kind of filtering back into the StarCraft scene. So always try to remind people of that when people do name change. But he's famous for inventing the Ragnarok of Banelings, which is where you make like 130 Banelings and then you just A-move them on your opponent's army. And it's kind of brutally effective a lot of the time in this matchup. Unless Cure is really careful with his setup. So to do that, though, Shin needs a huge economy. He needs a big bank. And because he had a slow start, there's already going to be heavy pressure on the south. Cure had an army supply 1-1, getting close to finish. Combat Shields is getting nearby as well. That tank does get blocked by his own units a little bit. But I love that siege up right there, hugging the edge behind the pillar. The Lingbane's going to struggle to defend this.
Yep, it's very cute as well, right? Putting the Hellions around it. Armory is about to finish up, so we can morph those Hellions into Banelings. Baneling's speed is 10 seconds away from finishing up. Shin is going to try to create a little bit of chaos with Lynx on the other side of the map, but keeping those Banshees alive is important. That does really help in dealing with some of those Lynx, and Shin is just looking like he's in a very rough spot, but this is his moment. He feels that he can get a good fight. First tank shot, decent. Second one is quite good. Shin gets the cleanup, but he doesn't get too many of the Marines. I'm not really a very big fan yet, Pig. Like, sure, we get the tank, but we have to ask ourselves to cast the question.
At what cost? Indeed. I mean, the units lost doesn't look that bad, but with the creep receding and the push arriving again, combat shields now kicking in. You're absolutely right. There's no Banelings ready. That hatchery is going to go down, and I think Shin has overcommitted to trying to keep this hatchery alive. He has to crush this army, and he might actually just do it. Banelings get a few good connections. Queens come forward. Banshees disappear. At least one of them does. If he can get rid of that other tank, there is one in reserve. The Banshee is very low. It goes down. Shin is down in supply, though. And I always feel like on this map, this is why a lot of players take the 5th base and the 4th at the same time, so they can just give one up and do more of a counterattack focused game, because this map naturally has a choke on the north, a choke on the south. It's kind of like a 2-lane map until you break all these rocks in the middle, and that's always going to be nice because it's hard to flank the Terran army. Normally you want to wrap around these armies. There's such good positioning for Cure, and Shin, he's kind of on his last legs. He's got to shut this army down because he's getting bled dry right now. The Banelings unable to connect.
The second tank by Cure is so good, right? And he moved it to the front eventually, so now we have a new backup tank. But it really is the backup tank that makes it impossible for Shin to truly stick around and try to get on top of those Marines that have been stimming quite wild. And some of these medevacs are a little bit low on energy, but extra medevacs show up. Shin never really had the resources to fire up 2-2. He's got +2 melee on the way now, but it really does feel that game 1 is just all Cure. The start was good. Shin hurt himself even a tiny bit more by making some overlords that he absolutely didn't need. And one good Baneling connection is pretty much the only positive for Shin here in game 1.
Still no add-ons on that 6, 7, 8 barracks for Cure. Just committing to the Marine count. Baneling's connecting a bit more than he'd like there. Uh-oh. Got to keep those tanks alive, Cure. I mean, you don't need to dive on creep here. You've just got to, not overcommit and keep trading well, which he seems to be doing. Shin is stuck. And I got to say, as a Zerg, when you're just fighting front on against Terran repeatedly, it's an awful feeling. Unless your name's Serral, who, I don't know, he tends to win those fights somehow and make it, a way out of them. But ideally, you don't want to be fighting where the Terran wants. Like, it's almost like rule 101 of any verse Terran matchup. If they siege somewhere, don't fight there, give up ground, go fight elsewhere. But it's just so tough on this map. And Kua got such deep positions in the Zerg territory, Shin had to defend it. Wasn't able to. He does get big Baneling connects on the high ground Marines. But it's like, this is like the Baneling things that make you think you have a chance, but you're so far behind already. It really is like, is that enough to make up for this 30 army supply advantage? I don't think so.
Yeah, I'm smiling a little because it goes back to what you were saying in the beginning of the game. Being a fan of Cure is rough because he will get you very excited. And then just when you're ready to celebrate, his Baneling connections are just way too large, 2-3 times over. And he'd almost say he's making life a little bit harder on himself than it has to be. But the macro is always solid on the side of Cure. He's got 2-2 upgrades. He's just parade rallying everything to the other side of the map. And no matter how good these Baneling connections are for Shin, Shin cannot possibly keep this up. Cure, he can do this all day, every day. This time the target fire is a little bit better. We're even running some Marines back, and I think that is going to do it for game 1 here on the Amygdala, as Cure just has overwhelming numbers as Shin forced to tap out.
Dominant start for Cure, and he finishes off the game without really showing too much weakness. Yeah, Marines got hit by Banelings a few times, but it was only once he was way too far ahead. It's going to be a hopeful finishing moment on a map with lots of choke points for Team Liquid's Cure in the top right side of the map. But of course, I don't think Gaiman Gladiator's Shin is going to let him block the third for a minute and kill 2 drones, Roddy, as you were just saying. You know, I think that's a big part of that last game. Now, don't get me wrong. I think if Shin didn't have that opening, he probably could have just overwhelmed the push with the frontal fights. But I think when you're in that position, you've really got to be a little more wriggly as the Zerg, a bit harder to pin down, a bit scrambly, a bit gambly, maybe even. And I would have liked to see Shin maybe play like 3 gas Massling Bane rather than playing Hydras and going like 80% of the army is counterattacking and backstabbing, and I'm breaking the rocks early to run through the middle to kind of loop around behind your army. But I think if you have such a rough start as Shin, yeah, he defended the Banshees well, surrounded 2 Hellions. It's not enough to make up for building 14 Zerglings, having the hatch delayed, all that stuff that went on. I think you have to play a much less standard game plan. So if this early game goes bad for Shin in either this game or if he gets to a game 3, I'd like to see him just kind of change his game plan to something that's maybe not quite as solid, but gives you a bit more comeback potential.
Yeah, I don't really like that. And obviously, Lings and Banes, then you can maybe find some damage with those units on the other side of the map while still having a decent amount of units at home. Those Queens did a really good job in buying time. Queen Ling Bane can definitely get it done against small numbers of Marines and 1 or 2 tanks, and that gives you the potential to still have some of those forces on the other side of the map. Well, if you're building the more expensive Hydras, knowing you already had a bad economic start, yeah, you're going to be forced to fight it, frontal fight, straight up, and this is very unlikely that it's going to go your way. So I think that makes sense, and maybe if Shin looks back at that game, be like, yeah, that was perhaps my only shot of making something, but we can't forget, these guys are all so incredibly good, and some of these starts that we've seen today, the early game is just so spectacular for one side that unless the other party messes up, it's really hard to make a comeback. It's never impossible, but it's just really hard, and it almost feels like the ball isn't really in your corner anymore. You need to hope that your opponent messes up. You can try to force out some mistakes, but you're not truly in control of it if your start is as poor as the start was for Shin last game.
Yeah, this time you'll have the ramp on the natural to help him get creep out a bit earlier as well. Once that Queen's out, of course, only 4 Zerglings. I love that he only went 4 Zerglings. I also love that he just walks a drone out past the Reaper there. That's kind of odd because there's already a hatchery there. Did he forget he built the hatchery already? Or was that... maybe he thought that was an Overlord and he clicked the egg there, not realizing, because that's a very weird drone hanging out at the third base.
Yeah, it's safe to say that that was probably not mandatory and that was not needed, but he's going to be able to send it back, has not lost it yet. This is a normal start for Shin. He's going to be happy with this. We're not in danger of losing this screen. I love what Cure did there. It's like, if you're so far off creep, I'm going to try to get you even a little further off creep, and maybe you'll miss some of the injects, and it's all going to be a bit delayed. In the end, didn't work out, but still love the attempt. Third command center going up at home. Starport, couple of Hellions, standard stuff from Cure. You know, I've personally been a pretty big fan of these Marine tank styles on this map where they go for a quick second factory. Because you can really get some gnarly fights here with Marine tank in the center with all the choke points and those bridges. I've seen Hero Marine do it a couple times and I like it, man. I think it's a very powerful Terran style on this map against Zerg.
Yeah, every time I just look at this map loading in on a Zerg versus Terran, I feel like every Zerg should already be thinking about, you know, just avoiding certain positions. Like, try not to get forced to fight there. So if you can, I mean, the ways you can do that, obviously counterattacking, we talked about in the last game, and giving up a base, right? So if you take a 4th and 5th base at the same time, you can give one of those up. It's hard on this map unless you expand to the far bottom right corner, because if you take this base like on the left side of your third, they can kind of push on the third and basically drive a wedge between both. So you can't really give up the third base on this map. So you've got to get creep out past the bridges as early as possible for map control. Use that, a mixture of counterattacks, you know, that sort of thing. And obviously having a much cleaner opening for Shin. He's not at 60 out of 90 supply. This is like perfect Overlord kind of gap, you know, just the Overlord's finishing as he's getting close to supply block. It feels like his macro's been on point, and it's going to be a completely different setup for him against Cure, who's playing a nearly identical style.
Yep, I love it. This just looks a lot cleaner, and this is the kind of stuff that we want to see from one of the best Zerg players in the world. Now, I do hope that this time it's not the complete opposite story for the Banshees, right? Last game, the Banshees, they were not very impactful. Let's hope that it stays that way for Shin, because the last thing that he needs right now is 2 Banshees finding 10 drones. And then we're kind of just going to repeat all the things that we were talking about before. But it just looks a lot better, it's a lot cleaner, and it feels now it's a fair fight. And we can truly see what this EVT of Shin is made out of.
Extra gases going down, as well as double Evo chamber and a lair. So Shin should be going up to 4 gas pretty quickly. There we go. 4th hatchery on the right side. Looks like he's, once again, just going to be saying, no, 4 base is fine. And I think on this map, that actually makes sense. I think on Amygdala, you can go 4th and 5th at the same time. But there's no way you're giving up this 4th base. It's actually your 3rd that's easier for the Terran to push into. The reason you take that forward 3rd is it allows you to get that creep out in the middle earlier and earlier. And the Banshees have not found any damage 2nd game in a row. They were fantastic for stopping Zergling counters in the last game, though. So it's not like they have no function. They force Spore Crawlers as well.
Yep. 2 drones, takes 1 or 2 hits from the Giga Chat Spore. Love how he moves the injured Banshee to the back, comes back, gets a few more hits off. No, thank the Lord there's no Overseer there yet for Cure. Otherwise, those Banshees really would have been in trouble. 4 drones, though, is pretty solid. And knowing Cure, he's probably just going to send them home. Cure is not a diver with his Banshees. He's really about just keeping them alive. It's like, it was a big investment, and it's so nice, especially against like heavy Ling Bane styles. And we know that Shin loves Ling Bane. To have these Banshees at home, put them on patrol right outside of your natural, your 3rd. Give yourself a bit of extra map vision. Give yourself the heads up of some Baneling run-bys coming. And it makes a lot of sense to me what Cure does with them. Tiny bit of damage, force out those spores, bring them home safe.
Medevacs boosting to the front to join with the Hellions and Marines. And I was about to say, is it going to be a 4th command center? Of course it's not. It's 8 barracks yet again. Pretty much every single time. Delays his armory to do that, does Cure. He actually stims all of his Marines. A little early there, but he's going to use it to clear up the creep with that scan. Ling Bane is nearby, though. He's got to be careful. Got to stay near that Medevac. And, it's not too bad. A couple Marines go down, but actually that was about 5, 6, 7 Marines went down. A few more than really should have. And Cure, you know, we sometimes talk about him being a little more prone to getting hit by those Banelings than other Terran players, but that was uncharacteristic. Normally, when there's only 1 or 2 things happening at a time, he's picture perfect. The time when I see Cure make little mistakes like that is usually when there's 4 or 5, fights happening at a time. The game gets really messy. There's just way too much multitasking for anyone that's not Clem to handle perfectly. But definitely got to be more careful around those Baneling hits, because this is a Shin who's got crazy map coverage. He's got Hydras out. 2-2 started for him before your armory's even finished. Ling's ready for the counter on the top left. I love the spotting depot. It'll give him a few seconds to react.
Yep, it's a night and day difference from that last game. And you're right, Cure is not the fastest player out there, but normally if there's only one thing to take care of, then he's obviously going to be fine. And when we say that, he's still incredibly quick, but he's just not as quick as some of the other guys that are at his level. But he's got incredibly good game understanding. He is incredibly good in setting up certain fights, baiting his opponents into taking fights they absolutely should not take. And we can already see him working on a little plan over here on the left side of the map. Shin has a decent amount of units everywhere. First engagement is going to be important, Pig. As always, the tank count is decent. The marine count is high. Especially these Hellbats could be annoying. And these were the Banshees, right? The purpose of the Banshees that we were talking about earlier. It's just nice to keep those boys alive.
Marines are going to try and bait Shin into taking a premature engagement. I think it was really good that Shin gave up the 5th base and is instead retaking it in the bottom right side. He's waiting for the right engagement. That being said, I'd love to see him counterattack. He's got Hydras, he's got Overseers. The Banshees aren't going to defend against that. He should be rolling into the 3rd and entirely flanking around this army. Shin, it feels like he's going to try and do the raw numbers overwhelm. It might work, but it does feel like the more dangerous option here. He's going to go for it.
Yeah, he's going to come in from 2 different angles. The tank count is quite high. Cure didn't stim actually a lot of these Marines, so he moved them back very slowly. He is gunning down a lot of Banelings on the top left side of this battle. Not too bad, I think, for Cure, even though Shin got all the units that he really wanted to get. It could have gone a whole lot worse for Cure. It definitely could have gone better as well, as he's now continuing to lose Marines, continuing to lose Medevacs. Did have a lot of units. He was just kind of late with the stim there, Pick. He just did not stim. The Banshees are working on queens, by the way, on the bottom side of the map, gunning down a 1st queen, maybe even a 2nd queen, and Cure with another move out. Less tanks, more Marines this time, but it's very important to keep an eye on the Medevac numbers. He doesn't have a lot of Medevacs. If he continues to stim all of these Marines, he's going to have a very hard time keeping his army healthy.
Surprising that Shin's not trying the counterattacks at all. Really front on focus for him. On Ultra Love, a map covered in really good tank spots and choke points. He's going to have to attack around corners off creep. and he's going to attack through the choke point entirely. Shin going for an absolutely maniacal engagement. A crazy angle. He's got faith in his numbers. He does get rid of one of the tanks and half of the Marines. He clears up the front of the push, but remember, this is the entire Zerg army against like 1/3 of the Terran army. Terran's army is always rallying across the map. So if you smash your whole army into it and half their army is still less, that's only half the army you can see. That's usually a bad sign as a Zerg player, especially now with 3-3 vehicle weapons coming in. Tech Lab starting to be added there. Second factory is up, which means double tank production is starting. But one good wave of Banelings on the Marines could change everything. Lings try to run in the right side. The massive depot wall actually keeps the Lings out, but they go for the surround of the Marines and tank rally. Nice up pickup for Cure. Saves himself a tank. All the Marines are forced back. And it's an okay fight there for Cure. Shin's going to need to use some Banelings. Smash this wall down. Limit this third. And the fact that the planetary is getting up on the top left kind of uncontested, it feels like Q is getting to pick and choose where the engagements are. I gotta say, on the strategic level, if I'm thinking about this from Shin's point of view, Roddy, how do I dissect Q? A guy who's not insanely fast but has sick pushes, really good when he's like focused on one or two areas at once. I thought I would encourage Shin to go for more counters and stuff, but it feels like Q has just been spotting them with the depots, shutting them down. Now he's got that like kind of vacuuming lawn mowing squad on the right side. He's clearing up map control. Now the planetary finishes before the Lings can get in. Shin's just not finding any openings.
No, the timing is just a bit unfortunate, right? Every single time where Shin could have found damage, he didn't look for it, he didn't try, and then right when he tried, it felt that the Cure was always ready, was paying attention, wall finish, planetary finish. It's a tiny bit unfortunate for Shin, who's got Hive Tech, by the way, made a Viper, a single Viper. Well, I don't know if that's going to make all the difference. I would have preferred to see Adrenal Glands. If he's this heavy on the Lings and the Banelings, Adrenal could have been done by now. Instead, he's dropping a Lurker then. To me, it just kind of feels that Shin is a little bit all over the shop and is not incredibly decisive. And Curious is kind of doing his thing, building a lot of Marines and tanks, sieging them up in good spots. And yeah, everything is now working out for Cure. Well, this was definitely a much better start for Shin. There really was some true potential here on Ultra Love. It's just starting to look very grim. Like, I don't really believe in the Ling Banes anymore.
Oh man, that tank position as well. Now that Q has got that tank position, and Shin's going to have to loop all the way through the middle. The tanks are well spread, but there's not many Marines there. Ling's finding 3 tanks in the open. This is what I love to see from Shin, catching a lot of the units out in the open. The Marines chasing the Banelings. It could be big problems for Q. Marines trying to defend. Banelings rolling into the Marines on the bridge! Oh my lord! 50 Marines go down on the bridge, but at the same time, Q is in the natural of Shin. Shin's Ling Bane Hydra rolling into the third. There's a tank on the high ground that will eventually defend. I don't know if Shin has the numbers. He's been on the back foot for so long. Can he ever get rid of these tanks on the front? Q maintains the position.
The tanks were so good, right? One tank in the main, one tank in the natural, making it impossible for Shin to truly stick around there. A couple of very low HP Marines and Marauders are deep in the natural. They even gunned down one of the 2 Vipers. A lot of extra units go down. Shin might be able to finally clean this up, but he has lost his entire natural. And in the natural, he also had the Baneling Nest. He has still not started up those Adrenal Glands, so the Lings are really not going to be able to stand with those Marines and Marauders. 3-3 bio against 2-2 Zergling. And I want to say Baneling, but yeah, we lost our Baneling Nest. And actually, I was like, wait, is he morphing Banes there? But those are the morphing Lurkers. They don't really have the sexy, fancy Hive Tech upgrades yet. Starting to look like it's the beginning of the end here for Shin. His timing was just a bit off throughout the entire game. Whenever he could have counted, he didn't. And then when he tried to find damage, it felt that Cure was expecting it, was ready for it.
Yeah, Q was able to put everything into a big frontal push and get the fights when he needed to have them. Nice transfuses on the Lurkers, but they're taking big tank shots. The Lurkers not attacking across the gap because Lurker range wasn't finished. Oh, so Shin sieged up there thinking he'd have 10 range Lurkers. They were only 8 range. I was wondering why they weren't attacking, and he was as well. And that's going to be that. Cure has too many units in the main base. Shin outgunned, outmanned. The tanks are outside his natural shelling on him. And this one, just a very dominant series for Cure. And it's good for him after all of his struggles in this matchup. It does lose a drop there at the end. It's crazy. I got to rewind for the Banelings on the bridge there because that was kind of a cinematic moment. But that was this series. There was a lot in 2 games. So many epic Baneling hits on these bridges in the midst of a game that it felt like was already over by the point they happened, unfortunately. So unfortunate there for Shin to find these moments. Cure definitely gonna have to wake up in his next series, though, in the winners match up against Serral. Oh, right. We got a trigger in the bottom left side of the match. It's the elimination match but no surprises to find himself here. He still had an excellent run in his first matchup against Serral. He's now against Shin in the top right. He's doing that 15 Overlord. The guy who was doing this before anybody else. But Lambo recently analyzed his play, realized, hey, turns out that 15 Overlord is actually the optimal build, and now everybody in the world is copying what Shin started. So cool to see him doing that. This is, of course, Talisman, a map with a worker-only path. No other unit can move through that path, but of course, these gold minerals can be opened up, and that's going to be a very advantaged base in terms of the early mining, if he can defend it from any early pressure. Sorry, I'm just blabbering on. How you doing, Roddy? What are your thoughts?
You know, I love that we're starting on this map. I think it's very cool. We were hoping to see a couple of the different maps out there, and these two apparently are both comfortable enough on this one to start gaming. Trigger has a probe scout now. It's very important for him to immediately go to this low ground and make sure that we see the hatchery, and I assume that he just saw enough there already, so he just goes back. Yep. Just want to confirm it, right? Because obviously proxy hatch are still a thing. And because there is a worker path that doesn't go into the main, it's one of these maps where you can't just assume things are what you expect them to be. It's like, oh, if you didn't take the hatchery, you probably just took it elsewhere. Because what if you rally the drone to the other side of the map? What if he builds a hatchery in your main, right? These are all things that you have to think of. But I'm excited. I think that Trigger is probably going to look at this, knowing the history of Shin, is probably expecting Shin to be aggressive, but that has never stopped Trigger from doing his own thing, because he can also be a very aggressive guy. I expect just non-stop battling between these two men, and it's really just going to come down to who's going to be a bit sharper and who's more on point today.
Indeed. It's kind of funny looking at these two mineral patches in the middle that will mine out pretty quickly. I always wonder if they just kind of got rid of those and actually made it so there's no way to open up the path to this base. Would it ever be taken by anyone? Probably not. It would definitely not be as easy a choice, but I think it is a pretty easy choice to take it when you've got the ability to open up a way to reinforce with queens and zerglings. Probe for Trigger sees the third hatchery, and he is, of course, going Stargate behind it. Shin, he's been a little addicted to Roach Hydra, even with his recent success. You were talking about before the match, beating Max Packs a bunch of times and stuff like that. There was a lot of Roach Hydra off 66 drones, and I do think that got a little repetitive for Shin to the point where Protoss players were expecting it and blind countering him. So what I'm looking for from Shin in this series, mix that in 1 or 2 games if you need to, but definitely, try to get him off kilter with maybe a German taxi, bring the queen drop out of the overlords, mix something in there to put Trigger on his toes before you go back to what you're known for.
This is already nice. He was hiding 2 Zerglings on the left side. He saw the Adept move out and then showed up at the perfect moment. Forced Trigger to spend a chrono quickly on that gate, but still some lost mining time. And I'm very curious, what can Trigger do on the other side of the map? Zergling speed is close to finishing up, but it's not quite done yet. But apparently that's not even needed here for Shin. A really clean defense. Sure, the man made a decent amount of links, but you compare that to some of the starts that Trigger had in his first series of the day. This is what you're looking for as a Zerg. Quick surround on those adepts. You don't have to worry about the second shade, the third shade. You don't have to worry about drones morphing into Evo chambers or spore crawlers. Well done. It's a big little victory in the early game here for Shin.
Yeah, momentum can change everything. As you said, we saw game 1 versus Serral. Trigger got so much momentum, and he ran with it. But this time, losing a few adepts doesn't really kill any drones. I mean, there was a decent amount of Zerglings that got forced to be built, right? It was 14 Zerglings, now another 4. Brings it up to 18. But Shin's had the gold-based mining. 4 gold mineral patches. He's opened up the path there to reinforce that line. And he's going to start working on these rocks on the front as well, so that he's not as vulnerable. Trigger's going to, of course, turn on that laser. Oracle energy no longer at the premium that it once was. With the energy recharge available, you can always find more energy when you need it.
Looking at how this game is shaping up, I was wondering if Trigger would go for a full wall in the natural and then just only try to full focus defend on the third, or if your opponent wants to get into the natural, then he's at least going to have to take down some of these tanky buildings. That is exactly what he's done. I think that's smart, but it is so important for Trigger that he mines out his gold minerals quickly then, otherwise he's going to have a horrific time defending that low ground third base that he's been taking.
Oracle's just looking for openings, and they will find a few drones, but good focus fire for Shin. Does put that Oracle deep in the red. And it's a melee build. Now, that's been spotted. The Oracle, I'm pretty sure it saw this Evo chamber. It did, so you know you're up against fast melee, and that's a style where, some players have been losing faith in it. I still think it's very good, but obviously you need to make sure you build enough Zerglings to throw back the first blink pressure. It's not enough to just trade with the Stalkers, because you're not really killing any until you overwhelm. Oh, almost a blunder for Trigger, but he keeps it alive.
So important, I think, to keep Oracles alive against a Zerg like Shin. The last thing you really have to worry about is Shin sitting back forever and going up to 7 bases and getting quick lurkers and then all the Vipers. No, Shin is a old school Zerg that likes to make a lot of battle units, whether it's Roaches or Hydras, or in this case it's going to be Lynx, Banes, maybe some Queen pressure eventually. And Oracles are so incredibly important to keep them alive for a long time. Trigger takes a crazy amount of damage, loses the healthy one. So he saved the one that was on very low HP. Got a tiny bit greedy there, Pig, and that's a big loss. In a game like this, against an aggressive Zork, you really don't want to be losing Oracles like that.
Not at all. Trigger's going to push forward to the 4th base. There is a lot of Zerglings out. Shin paused on 58 workers to mass Zerglings. That's kind of what you need to do when you play +1 melee. Get enough Lings. So if the Protoss pushes you, you can counter, and you can do big damage. And even here, just attacking the wall off's a valid choice. Adepts don't do that much damage, so he could go for it, but with the Stalkers and Oracle coming in from behind. Shin doesn't want to throw away any Zerglings. He's droned up to 63 workers now, slightly behind. And if Trigger can get that gold base up and heading towards Psystorm, one wonders if there's an opening, because Shin, like, yeah, you defended well, but now you've been forced into mass Zergling. You haven't found an opportunity to trade. If you can't deny this 4th base, your Hydra upgrades are just so very late. And I think, yeah, going for the 4th, it's a good dive attempt. But with the Oracle and the Stalkers there, he realizes he's going to cost every Zergling. He might not even get the Nexus at the end of that, and that would be a disaster.
Okay, big moment here for Shin as he's morphing a couple of Banelings in the bottom. He can roll those Banelings into the 3rd base of Trigger. Trigger currently doesn't have a lot of damage there. I'm not a very big fan of Trigger putting all of his cannons and batteries right next to each other, Pig, because if Banelings start connecting, the Banelings will get connections on all of those buildings at once, and just a few good Banelings is going to be good enough. It'd be a lot more useful for Trigger to space out the cannons and batteries a bit. Man does not have Storm here. Is he also losing the High Templars and Probes at the same time? Oh no. An absolutely fantastic slow bailing attack here by Shin. Trigger may have taken a decent fight in the center, but that did not matter. That was a distraction maneuver on the side of Shin. Amazing slow bane run by.
Double value combo deal, Roddy. I mean, that's... You go there to buy a burger, they give you 3. They just go, they're on the house, man. You are not expecting 3 to 4 High Templar and a full mineral line like that. I thought Trigger was in a good position, you know? Yes, the cannons were a little clumped, but who cares? You got 4 base, multiple gold patches, 6 gases. You've got Storm coming in now before the Hydra upgrades are ready. And that's what I was talking about, is you're going to have Storm, Stalker, Cannon Battery, 4 base before Hydra's are ready. The Hydra army isn't going to be scary. You know, unless the Hydras can get on his natural wall without him seeing it. But he's out front with his Stalkers. But, of course, now the numbers. He's just had to spend all of his money rebuilding his workers. His actual army count is nothing. 11 Stalkers? Like, the cannons are his main damage output. Besides the Psystorms, it's cannons and storms.
Yep, and obviously he lost those High Templars, so he's got less storms to work with, doesn't really have any Oracles. He's building a Robo and a Fleet Beacon now. You know you're playing against Shin, right? He is coming. Well, that's what I was talking about earlier, Pig. That's why I don't love all those cannons and batteries on top of each other. Trigger is unfortunately here in all sorts of trouble, and there's a good chance that he is just going to get overwhelmed. He has built a lot of workers. He's investing in stuff that's really not going to come into play. Has lost High Templars earlier. Is dropping a couple of good storms here. But you mentioned it. The army supply definitely does not lie. And yeah, Trigger just has no damage here. Nothing.
Yeah, Shin doing really nice off the early gold base. Took map control with the Zerglings, so he couldn't get pinned back. You know, at the moment we're seeing a lot of Protoss players just take map control with Stalker, Oracle, Zergs just stuck defending. And they can't keep up in the long game because they're on the defense the whole time. Shin did not let that happen. He got the melee upgrade, took map control, and that surprise Baneling attack did really well. You've got to watch out for that angle. He was so worried about the vulnerable front 4th, he got caught off guard. As we go into map 2, guys, Trigger on the bottom right side of Whispers of Gold, and Shin, Baneling Magic in the first map. And Whispers of Gold, a pretty good map for being aggressive, but it will be a map where both players are a little more practiced, and they have a few more reps. So I think Trigger's less likely to get caught from a sneaky angle by Banelings like that. It felt like he really just was not expecting Banelings arriving from below his 3rd base.
I always love how an experienced Zerg like Shin sets that up, right? Where he's like, hey, I see your Stalkers in the center. I'm going to pretend that I'm going to take a somewhat bad fight with Ling Hydra here. I'm going to give you a couple freebies. Protoss players get excited. They're like, oh, I can micro my Stalkers to full potential here. And, you know, you get freebies. You're like, yay. And then you look over your third. You're like, oh, my God, I got bamboozled. 4 High Templars, 12 probes going down. Just a bit of a disaster. And Yeah,
Indeed.
Trigger's gonna have to be sharper. He's gonna have to be just a little bit more dialed in because there's a few things. If you clean it up a little bit, especially losing the Oracle and spending your money in silly ways, also the cannon and battery placement. A lot of these things I don't think make the difference, but you add all of it up, and obviously it did make the difference, right? But again, Shin, you're really gonna have to think well about these things because cannons and batteries can be your saving grace. There's a reason why a lot of Zergs hate playing ZVP right now, and that is because they dread that late game. They hate they can't abduct the mothership. So because of that, they're not just gonna let you get there, and you have to keep that not just in the back of your mind, but that has to be almost the first thing you're thinking of with every decision you make in these games.
You know, that's a really good point you make, Kev, because early in this patch, December, January, I kept seeing Shin win with like the Roach Hydra off 66 drones over and over and over again. And it was funny because I was like, well, whenever I see a pattern that just repeats itself in StarCraft, I think, okay, we must be missing something as players, as casters. Like, let's go back to basics and fundamentals. And I was like, what do we know about Shin? And I was like, well, he doesn't like playing late game. Number one. Number two, Zergs hate playing late game on this patch. Number three, the last time I saw him win a game at Hive Tech versus Protoss where he wasn't already miles ahead was a long time ago. And then I was like, seeing these Protosses rush to 80 probes 4 base and die to 66 drone Roach Hydra repeatedly. And I was like, wait a second, what would Zest do? You know, I always try to think of like, what's a player who's like really got his own style and is like famous in a matchup. And I think Zest would just not take a fourth. Like he'd sit on 3 base till 10 minutes and just make the sickest army of like storms and stuff. And just like, there's no way he would ever die. He would force Shin to play Hive Tech and like the game which Shin doesn't want to play. And that's just so out of the wheelhouse of most modern Protoss players, right? Yeah. Because it seems weird because you're giving up on the 4th base. The game's all about economic growth and exponential growth. So I don't know, sometimes I think we get stuck in a meta and players forget about some of those old styles. We should draw inspiration from the past.
Yep, you really don't have to be 12 workers ahead and already thinking of like what's going to happen at minute 16. No, we need to survive against the Zerg that has 60-something workers and has 130 army supply heading your way. And Storm is great, energy recharge, awesome, but you're gonna need a little more than 40 army supply because you're just not going to stop 100-something of the Zerg. Once more, Shin, his Zergling positioning quite good. This time Trigger does get 1 drone. I think he maybe could have gotten a second there, but he's prioritizing keeping the Adept alive. So 1 drone, 4 links, 1 Adept lives. Still good defense, I think, by Shin. If you're Shin, you're going to be happy with that. Slightly better, at least on the side of Trigger, because this time he did get 1 worker, and he kept 1 Adept alive.
Yeah, and the Oracle here, making sure his 3rd goes up. I mean, we look at the game he won, perfect 3rd base, uncontested versus Serral. We look at the games where he's lost so far against Serral and Shin, and it's like 3rd base getting interrupted, Lings running and killing Adepts, you know, things going awry. So I like that Trigger's a bit more controlled this time around. Dives the Adepts, but then gets 1 out, and now really, really calm and controlled. 2nd Oracle's out, instant energy recharge on that, and it looks like no 3rd Oracle today. He's just going to be scouting a little bit, forcing Shin to build 6 queens early on, and 3 Spore Crawlers. So the full complement of anti-air defense against just a double Oracle opening. You don't need to do massive damage here, but there are still opportunities. Just don't want to lose the Oracles.
No, you just want to try, and Trigger has been trying. You could really see him waiting to activate Pulsar Beam earlier, hoping that a drone would pop, and then you can obviously use that as well to gun down some larvae once you have it activated. But for the people who don't know, obviously you lose 25 energy every time you activate Pulsar Beam, so you don't just want to do it for a single larva and turn it off. That's a little bit of a waste. You'll get more value out of some revelations, some stasis traps, or just wait for that one opportunity where drones are exposed. So far, though, Shin definitely having good queen positioning, good Spore Crawler timing. He's not giving a lot away. Like, Shin, for all of his flaws, is definitely so damn good at a lot of basic Zerg things. He's making it out. Look how hard Trigger has to work for a single drone. Takes some real damage as well. It's not even just shields. Overall, I think pretty successful early game here for the Zerg.
Yeah, a lot of Zergs try to get away with 5 queens, skip a Spore or 2. Shin's not taking any chances. I think he's just realizing if he doesn't let Trigger get momentum, it's going to go better for him. And I really do feel like, I don't think you get this sense unless you've played games against Trigger a bunch. Multiplayer, you know, gaming head-to-head with these guys, he has insane mechanics. Like, Trigger is incredibly fast. I put him and Clem in like a special club of kids who love to click, like faster than any of the other pro gamers, like Raynor as well, you know, Dark maybe in there. You're just like, if you give him momentum, he'll multitask in 3-4 places in a way which feels impossible to get on top of. So I think Shin, he does this against guys like Bjorn in Zerg vs. Terran, who's known for his micro momentum. He just doesn't let them get going. He's like, I'll build a few more units, shut down your pressure, very kind of Serral-esque, never let you get that momentum, so you can't really screw with me. That being said, look at this big Ling counterattack, mass Roach Ling behind it, of 57 workers. My man is planning a Ravager Ling Queen Walk. It's a classic build. The Ling counterattack as well. If Trigger Stalkers get surrounded, he is screwed.
Yep, Trigger's gonna have to be very, very careful. I think this scout here is quite useful. You see a couple of roaches morphing into Ravagers, while there is not really anything that he would need Ravagers for defensively. So if you're Trigger here, you start working on some batteries. I wouldn't hate a couple cannons either. I think it's nice. Drops the Revelation. Gonna see the Queens. Queens are kind of exposed, actually. You might be able to battle this for a split second. I understand the hesitation because you're worried about the real Zerg army. Stasis traps are really big to begin with. Energy recharge gets used immediately. Seems like a promising start for Trigger, but can he keep it together?
Yeah, the Oracle needs to get on top of those Zerglings. Quite a few probes go down, but it's more important to keep the Stalkers and Oracles alive, and the Ravagers are struggling right now. This was a crazy YOLO for Shin. He was focusing on hiding his armies at the last second, but that meant his Queens got separated from the rest of his force, and we are seeing Trigger shut this army down rather hard. It's just Lings and Queens left over. And that was an absolute failed attack. It was all about, like you pointed out, the Ravager Scout. The moment he saw that, Trigger dropped 3 shield batteries, pulled his army home, and he brought his oracles back to double check where the army was, caught those queens. I mean, that was really good scouting for Trigger, and I think Shin's regretting morphing those Ravagers at the front of his third base.
Yep, and not just that, I think he's also regretting trying to right-click that stasis trap, because that's also where it went wrong. If he can just split off 3-4 links, activate those stasis trappies, he would have definitely had some potential there. Even with the queens coming in from a weird angle, but he had a lot of units. It would have been difficult for Trigger, but now it was just a total nightmare. So many of the links were stuck, they were not able to fight, and this game is all over. Elimination match, lower bracket, we are going to the decider. Trigger still alive, Shin still alive.
Well, game 3 is going to decide it all. Trigger in the bottom right side for Basilisk sends one of his very first probes across, because on this map, the third base is miles away. So if you can block that hatchery, it's amazing. And you can see the Overlord can't get down there in time to spot the probe. So the only way you could get it down is, I think, if you go 14 hatchery before Overlord. Even 15 hatchery before Overlord, you might struggle to get it down. And of course, Shin's going to come down here and realize, okay, cool, going to take my base. There's no probe. But actually, the probe is there. Oh, he didn't see it. Oh no, this is really bad for Shin.
Yep, that's very annoying. I mean, he couldn't do much, so now it's just going to be a little bit later. What we have been talking about is keep in mind who you're playing. That is important. Players play different. You've got a lot of information on these guys. Clearly, Trigger is doing that here. Because if you think of Trigger earlier today, opening match, El Dorado didn't scout at all against Serral. But that's Serral. And now against Shin, he is going to scout, and he is going to try to make things a little bit different. In the end, it will be spawning pull into hatch. Maybe with a pylon, we could have delayed that hatchery even more, or temporary pylon, right? But it's nice to see Trigger making adjustments based on who he's playing, and that's very important at the highest level, because everyone is good at things, but still, even at this level, players will excel at different things, and then you've got a couple outliers who excel at everything, right? But Shin is really good, but he can be predictable. He does have weaknesses. He can be crazy. Keep that in mind when you're entering a series, and it's good to see that Trigger is making adjustments based on who he's playing.
I haven't seen Shin being a big fan of drops, but I wouldn't mind drops. You know, Overlord drop speed has been upgraded a few times over the last year or so. They move slightly faster. So, you know, that main base in the south being open to drops, assuming Trigger expands to the top right. But I guess that all depends on where Trigger does expand to with his third. Not many Protoss players like going for the third on the south, simply because you've got to spend a little bit of time mining those minerals open. Also, yeah, it can create some weirdness. I think we have just created the ladder version of the map, which has a slight imbalance on this map. It's 14 minerals on the left. I think it's only 10 on the right, which means even though it's the same number of trips to mine the minerals out, you get 4 less minerals. Game breaking. So absolutely Shin favored right now.
You scared me there for a second. I had no idea what you were on about. I was like, how big of a deal is this? And we're talking about 4 minerals, Pig. I think the integrity of the tournament is still intact.
Oh, thank you. Whew. Had to wipe that bead of sweat away there. But always funny to see those weird little things that slip through. Drone's going to move out to the northern third. Adept's hanging out. Second one's coming forward. I think you've seen Adept dives after Adept dives. I would imagine we're going to see 2 more pairs of Zerglings queue up pretty quickly here, but actually 2 more drones. If Trigger dives in, could find some value.
Yeah, it all comes down to the positioning. Maybe you can go to the corner of the main base first, right, where
Yeah.
there's no creep. And okay, he's going to change the round instead. He's going to get on top of the drones. That's the first drone. Second drone. Now we're going to be forced to set up a couple links. But he could go back, rotate towards the drones. That's exactly what's happening.
Oh.
Make it 4, make it 5,
Oh.
Piggy. 5 drones. Sure, both the depths went down, but a dream start here for triggering game 3.
That's super worth. Oh, the only saving grace there for Shin is that because he built so few Zerglings, only 8, at least he had a few more drones than if he'd say built 12 or 14 Zerglings, but 5 is not good. And Trigger will feel happy about that, and Trigger will go for the more standard expansion. So both sides going to expand along the top edges of this map. Yeah, I wonder if Shin tries Mutalisks here. It feels like one of those strategies. It's always a good surprise, the Spire, but if it gets scouted, it feels like it's such a big investment, takes so long to pay off, and you kind of end up with a dead Spire you can't invest into. So, like I said earlier about the Swarm Host prediction we were making, hard to do that in Game 3 of a deciding series that decides your life in the tournament. So I think we might see something more in the normal realm of Shin. I would not be surprised to see a big Roach Hydra push, and as that is his bread and butter, and going back to those basics, definitely something he might opt for.
Yeah, Trigger obviously is a massive fan of Blink follow-ups. More often than not, he will go Stargate into Blink. And then I think when it comes to the Muta, it's funny because there are some moments where like Mutalist play can look good, even against quick Twilights with quick Blinks, just because some Protoss players have a very difficult time, especially if you have 2 a lot, to defend everywhere, right? Defend multiple bases against Mutalist play. I'd say I'm one of them, Pig, and that's why I build Phoenix every single game, because defending with Stalkers is hard, but I actually think Trigger is very good at that. You mentioned it earlier. The boy loves to click, he is damn fast, and I think when it comes to multitasking with Blink Stalkers, especially if they have an upgrade lead over Mutas, he's not too scared of those things, right? He can absolutely hang there, so I don't think Muta is the play here for Shin. Honestly, I would find it a bit crazy if he does it, and he has dropped the Roach Warren. Could be a safety Roach Warren, but we'll keep an eye on it. I think maybe a just good old Roach Hydra, perhaps some Lurkers, maybe even Lair Tag Lurkers, right? Why not? If they can sometimes work against just Stalker armies.
The North American special, you know, no one ever expects it at the top level, but it's those rare strategies that no one does where people are like, well, that's bad on paper. And you're like, yeah, it's bad on paper because you can counter it with a very specific response, right? And a very, you know, calm handling of it, which almost loses the Oracle with a misclick there. Bit of a mistake for Trigger, but gets it out. Can use that defensively still. And yeah, I think if, you know, Lair Tech Larkers is obviously gimmicky, but these are the things you can pull out under pressure. Thing is, Lair's about to finish. We're going to be finding out. Does he drop a really quick infestation? But it's so rare for Shin to do it. But it would go against his image. You know, you rush Hive here, you drop instant infestation. No, he goes for the Spire. Okay, wow. He is liking that on this map. And I much prefer it with this expansion layout than what we saw the other day in the Weekly Cup. So that's going to be really interesting to see. Mass Roachling try to throw back the Stalkers and then surprise with a big wave of Mutalisks.
I'm definitely worried though for Shin because he's gonna have a tough time just battling the Stalkers right now. Spires are expensive, 200 minerals, 200 gas. Obviously lost a couple drones early on. Like, this is not an army that Shin looks at and be like, oh yeah, let me just surround it. He actually needs to start thinking about it. The longer you think, the more stasis traps go up. Tiny bit concerned here for our Korean Zerg as he leads the charge with a couple links, but Trigger, rightfully so, sizes up this army and says, sure, I want a piece of that. He's not scared, Big, and so far he absolutely has no reason to be scared.
Yeah, as long as those Oracles stay back, I mean, he's got 2 stasis traps. You have to give up the 4th base here as Shin does not feel good to go back to 3 base. First 3 base, especially with Trigger starting his 4th base now. 1 stasis goes off, the Zergling's caught. Oh, Queen's off creep for a few seconds. They're going to get focused. Trigger happy to snag a few Queens. With the Spire finishing up, I mean, he's going to have to find big damage with those Mutalisks. Luckily, the Lings do find the 4th. Might be able to cancel it. 400 hit points left. Still building, which means it's gaining hit points pretty quickly. The Lings need to target it, and they will commit and get the cancel. Nice play there for Shin to get something back in his favor, but it does feel like the Roaches just do not excel, even with Roach speed, against Stalkers, right? Off creep especially. It's nice to have a few range units mixed in, but the Oracle's always there to just chase him off. The units lost have 2.5 to 1 in favor of Trigger. Yes, we've got a bunch of Mutalisks coming out, 11 Mutalisks, but it's back into just mass Zergling and trying to swap to Hydras because these Roaches are not cutting it for Shin right now.
It's going to be so hard for Shin to make a bunch of Hydras. 66 drones and 3 bases. He needs to pray that his Mutalisk really start finding good damage. Maybe get a bit fortunate. Maybe perhaps trigger warps in a couple units in the top side of the map. And right on that moment, Mutas show up. No energy for recall. So perhaps best case scenario here for the Mutalisk of Shin to find some damage. Trigger with no respect for these Mutas at all. Warp Stalkers underneath. Probably not the best move pick. Okay, Trigger actually struggling a little bit with the Mutas here. Decent start for Shin, but he's gonna need more than these 10 probes and a couple of Stalkers with the way that the game has been going for him.
Indeed. I mean, it's a good start, but with a 4th base only now going down, Infestation Pit going down, the problem here for Shin is he's being forced to a game he does not want to play. Transition for this is you have to turtle up to Lurkers and Hive Tech, and that's not his specialty. Love to see him focus the cannon there as it starts. He goes for the probes instead. Obviously, the probes are always the highest value target. When you look at the hit points of a unit and how much mineral cost it is, workers are the best target for pretty much any harassment ever. But Mutalisks are getting 17, 18. It's crazy, yeah.
Ridiculous damage. 10 Mutas against a bunch of Stalkers. A gateway player, 8 gateways, +1 was done, Blink was done. I never thought that these Mutalisk of Shin would find 22 workers and a couple of Stalkers as well. Let's not forget about it. A lot of lost mining time. Shin completely back in it. These Mutas, absolute MVPs. And if Shin wins this game, he should build a statue for them. Because they have done what no other Zerg unit, I think, would have been able to do for him.
No one believes in the Mutas at the moment, Roddy. And sometimes it's just the lack of practice that players have against them that makes them great again. You know, mixing in old strategies is actually so effective because Trigger did not handle that perfectly. He defended the first wave not too badly. It was like, 10 probes, but he just wasn't ready for the follow-up. Like, he needed to commit 3 different squads of Stalkers across this big spread of bases, and he didn't do that. He wasn't quite ready for it, and so he loses a lot of workers. Trigger now finds himself, of course, adding Storm, but he's on 32 Stalkers and Storm against a guy who's going to have Lurker range soon. So as long as Shin can defend this Stalker attack, add Lurkers, thrust, I don't know if a guy with no robo can deflect a big Lurker push.
I'm just smiling because this is what we want to see in the elimination match. Tournament live on the line for both players. It looked a little grim for Shin, but he is totally back into it. And he's now confident that he can start battling these Stalkers on the edge of creep or even off creep. But he's also building a couple of spines. Like, I think we're in for a proper banger here where Trigger is going to get his robos, should be able to get some observers, some immortals eventually. But at this point, it's a lot more about the Storms and the Stalkers. As he's going to get a couple of extra cannons and batteries as well. Trigger is completely missing this move out pick, and missing move outs against Lurkers can be incredibly deadly.
And he loses a High Templar to the Mutas. They're going after the Oracles now up top as well. Amazing play there. The Lurkers showing no respect. Shin, so decisive. Where there's a will, there's a way. If you tried to write down on paper how Shin wins his StarCraft games, most people would not be able to emulate this, but the Mutalisks were just exceptionally well done. The Roach Hydra getting in, and if you're attacking into a Siege Lurker setup with Mass Stalker, it is one of the worst spots to be in as a Protoss player on Mass Stalker. Mass Stalker not good versus the Lurkers. Love to see the Roach Hydra keep pushing up the ramp. I think, you know, he has to fight into Shin, so as long as Shin keeps pushing up that ramp, I don't know if you can handle this with Trigger and his army.
Shin has already killed the Robo as well, so that is great. Love the positioning of the Roaches and the Hydras there on top of those Lurkers, making it harder for the Stalkers to gun some of those low HP Lurkers down. Trigger does have a Mothership on the way, does have a Tempest on the way, and he's doing his best to cut off some of those reinforcements. I mean, this has definitely been pretty decent, but Shin is getting closer and closer, not just killing a Gateway, but maybe even killing the Nexus or more. These Lurker shots pick on the Stalkers, they hurt the heart of every Protoss fan out there. I love it. Shin so freaking decisive. Way before Lurker range was even done, he just knew that was his moment to go, and he full send it. And look at the position that he's getting himself into.
Yeah, Trigger stayed in that top lane of the map for too long. When you're on a Stalker Storm army, you cannot let the Lurkers push you. You've got to buy time for Tempests and Mortals, the things that can actually deal with the Lurker pushes like the Mothership. But he just was not expecting Shin to transition that hard. The Mutalisks did too much damage, caught him off, and Shin being prepared to go to the late game, even though it's not his specialty, really well done. Probes attacking into Hydras is a little bit like sending children into a modern battlefield. It's not a good idea. It's kind of nasty to watch for any Protoss fans out there. Mama comes out to protect her babies, but I think it's long gone at this point. Shin's on 82 workers, maxed out almost. He's got the upgrades coming in as well. Things like Frenzy, aka the, I think it's called Lunge now. Nanomuscular Swell, the name of the upgrade.
Yep, Hydra Dash at first, and now launching. He's getting all of it. Shin obviously more than happy with everything that has happened for him in the last 2-3 minutes. Trigger indeed just kind of stuck in that top side of the map, wondering if you can get a few more Zerglings and Roaches, and she's like, I'm not worried about that. These Mutas have slowed you down, and I believe that these Lurkers, even before the big sexy hive tech upgrades, can make the difference. That's still hard to get a Protoss out of a game, especially once Mama is out, once that Tempest Scout starts climbing. Trigger is starting to find a couple of decent engagements, but it's a numbers game, and Shin just still has so much. But if Trigger can stabilize, get a few more storms, there's always a shot for the Protoss.
Ah, yeah, 4 more Overseers arrive, so that Mothership detection ain't gonna work. Mama gets focused down. She is always the one thing that has made some crazy comebacks over the last few months, but this one, of course, is a little bit too far as Shin keeps his tournament life alive. And Trigger, unfortunately, our first player to depart the tournament, but doing a very good showing in a very challenging group. GG, well played.